Hello everybody, it's Murray here and welcome back to my channel M Stuart Paintings. On today's acrylic painting tutorial we're going to paint this really realistic forest painting. I'm going to teach you when blocking in how to use different colours to push things back or to bring things forward. I'm going to teach you how to use different tones of green and a fan brush to create easy leaves and texture, and then how to put trees over the top and use pastel colours to make them look far off into the distance. How to use darker darks in your foreground to bring things like trees into the foreground, and then how to put details such as leaves and bushes over the top of them. And then lastly, how to add sky holes so it looks like light is coming through your trees and make it look hyper realistic using different brush techniques so you can paint this gorgeous realistic forest path landscape painting. So let's get into it. So welcome everybody, here are the colours I use for the tutorial. They are titanium white, cad yellow deep hue, yellow ochre, cad orange, raw sienna, luminous green, light green, chromium oxide green, sap green, cobalt blue, iris purple, raw umber and ivory black. Now I've got an A4 canvas here which is the size of a piece of paper, a piece of printing paper, and all I've done, I've created a far off bank in distance with some faraway trees which we're going to make nice and pastel and push this back into the distance. We're going to have a little bank to the right and another bank here on the left which we're going to use darker colours to bring it forward, and then we're going to have some lights coming from the left hand side and coming down a forest pathway. So if you'd like to copy down this basic outline, we'll get started. So if you'd like to pause the tutorial, and then once you've copied it down, we're going to start at the back and we're going to work our way forward as per usual. So I've got all these different types of green and I've got all these different warm colours on the left hand side. What we're going to do, we're just going to create a sort of greeny yellow, and we're just going to create a sort of mid-tone using bright cad yellow and some light green. If you haven't got light green, you can just use sap green and then just put loads and loads of yellow into it so you get a lighter green. As I appreciate not everyone has the same colours at home, but basically you want to create sort of a lime colour by just mixing more yellow than you do green, and you want it nice and bright. You can add a tiny bit of purple and you can add a tiny bit of brown because they suck out the vibrancy of the colour. So if you want to make your colours less vibrant and less bright, you can do that. Now all I'm going to do, I'm just going to fast forward this because all we're doing is literally blocking in one solid colour. There's nothing technical. Anytime we're going to do anything technical, I'll put the speed back down and you can see it step by step in real time. But all we're doing is literally going around our outlines. Don't worry if you do cover up your trees, we can paint them back in later. We just want a rough idea where they're going to be. And what we want to do is just block it in with this core colour. And there we go. So this bank is going to be pushed back into the distance. So we're going to use pastel colours, and we're going to use this colour which is raw sienna. You can make this with brown and orange if you haven't got it at home. And all we're going to do, we're going to add some cobalt blue and some purple to the mix to turn it more grey. Can you see how the blue and the purple turn it more grey? And don't worry if you've got a little bit of green in it. It actually kind of looks kind of more foresty and realistic and earthy. So I'm just going to put a little bit more blue in it to turn it more grey and darker. Pastel blue is really cobalt blue is really good for making things look far away and more pastel. And I'm just going to add a little bit of white just to make it again more pastel, and we'll test that out. So again, I'm just fast forwarding it a little bit while we block in this bank. So the reason we're using a pastel colour is it makes it look far off into the distance. The more harsher colour, such as black, the more it brings it forward. So this bank is slightly closer, and this one on the left is going to be even closer. So we're going to make the bank here on the right just a little bit darker by adding some more blue. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to put the underpainting. I'm just going to add a little bit of sap green, which is a very dark green, which you can make using green and cobalt blue. So we're just going to mix that together, and again we're just going to block in with this one solid colour, and I'll put the speed back down in a minute. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to use darker colours to bring things nearer. Anyone who watched the last tutorial where we did the cliff tops, that's what we were doing. We were using colours to create distance. So what I'm doing here, look, I'm just gently shading into the previous colour so you don't notice the transition, so it looks all natural. And then this bank here is going to be even darker, so we're going to add more black and more blue and more sap green, a tiny bit of black. We're going to make a very dark silhouette, and all we're going to do, we're just going to block in this bank with this core colour. So a nice easy start. We've got a greeny yellow background, we've got a pastel sort of browny blue in the far off bank going into a darker colour on the right, and then we've got this really dark silhouetted bank. So what we're trying to do is push this area back so it looks really far away, bring this one a little bit forward and bring this last one really close to the viewer, and then let's block in our path. Now we're blocking everything in, so we're going to get some of this nice raw sienna, this sort of warm orangey brown, and we're just going to mix it slightly into the previous mix, and a little bit of white to turn it more tan colour. We're going to add some cobalt blue and a little bit of yellow just to warm it up, just a little bit of cad yellow, and again some white to make it more pastel, and we'll test that out. Now we're going to have lots of sunlight on this lovely forest path, so what we're going to do, by using yellow, so all the colours I've got here on the left, they're sort of warm colours, they're like yellows and oranges. So let's just make some like a buttery Naples yellow, excuse me, some yellow, white and a dot of purple. So yellow, white and a dot of purple. So let's just create some warmth. So this could be sort of where the sun is shining down onto the path. And the reason we're using yellows is because if you think of sunlight, it's kind of like bright white. But as it cools down, it's sort of, if you think of a rainbow, it goes to like yellow, then into orange, and then into sort of pinks and reds. If you think of a flame. So we're using warm colours such as yellows and this raw sienna to create these sort of nice sort of mid colours. And we're just creating sort of shapes of light. So if you imagine the light sort of peeks through the trees and it sort of creates nice sort of highlights and you get silhouettes of the trees. So I'm just going to go back to the darker tone, which was raw sienna white and a tiny bit of yellow. So we've just got areas that some are a bit in the shade and some are just getting more highlights from the sun. So again, don't worry if your painting is messy or scruffy, this is all part of it. We're just trying to gauge the colours. It's like building a foundation for the house. If you do everything correct at the beginning, as you add more things on top and more detail and more complicated stuff, it's so much easier. So if we do all these just boring core things at the beginning correctly, everything else, once we put the detail and everything over the top, is so much easier. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get some of the dark silhouette colour and I'm just going to mix it into the previous colour because it's a bit harsh. So by mixing it into that sort of raw sienna, we can create, look, just a sort of a warm grey just by combining the two areas. And all I'm going to do, I'm kind of going to create a silhouette just of a tree that's coming down onto the path. And I'm deliberately trying to darken up my corners. Still trying to make it nice and soft. So just blending it while it's wet. And the reason we darken up our corners in paintings is we always try to get someone who is viewing our painting to look down the middle. So by having the path kind of fade out into the middle, and we're also going to have the light shining down the middle, and by having darkened corners, it will get the viewer to look straight into the painting and look like they're actually there, which is the whole point of a landscape painting. And look, if you get a dark colour, if you want to take the harshness out, look, you can just spread it. So if you do lay the paint and it's nice and thick, you can always just soften it while it's wet by just blending it. So take your time. It's a complicated painting today, but as I say, I'm still gonna do lots of tutorials for beginners, but I'm still gonna try to push people and get you out of your comfort zones and try to learn more technical things. But all the things we're gonna do today, there we go. So we've got our nice background pushback, and then we've got this bank bringing it forward, and it's tricking the eyes. So now we're gonna work on the bank. And we're going to work on all these leaves, and I'm going to teach you how to do that. So let's get some yellow, and let's get some white to create sort of a Naples yellow. Yeah, so I'm trying to push people and teach you more technical things as we go along. I'm still going to make it easy for you, don't worry. But the whole point of learning is that you progress, and soon enough you won't need me. So the good thing is, I'm trying to get to the point where I have a catalogue of tutorials that you can just binge on and learn certain techniques. And then you can go and use these techniques in your own artwork. So all I'm doing is I'm making just random splats with this sort of Naples yellow around my dark lime green. And what that will do, at the beginning, it's very slow. Look, it's not a hard process. So let's speed up the footage so you can see it a bit quicker. But all it is if you just have a bit of patience and you do it in real time, we're just creating little splats. And these are all the leaves that are getting a bit of sunlight. So as the sun comes through, you'll have some leaves getting the light and some that are in the shade. And don't worry, because acrylic paints are water-based, sometimes when you lay a light colour like this Naples yellow, it looks very bright at first, but when it dries, it's absorbed the lime green underneath, and it doesn't look as vibrant. So if that's ever the case, and it looks a bit naff and a bit rubbish, you can always just thicken up the paint and give it a second coat of paint. So look, some of the areas I'm just going over twice. But all I'm doing, I'm just trying to create little random squiggles to give the illusion of texture, that there's loads of leaves. So I'm just going to put a bit more yellow into the mix. So behind our big trees that we're going to have here, this is going to be sort of the focal point. We're going to have lots of light shining down into the path. So by using bright yellows around this area, we can sort of really insinuate that there's loads and loads of heat from the sun and loads of bright light. So again, just using warm colours to insinuate light. So we can use warm tones for things that are in the bright light, and we can use cooler tones for things that are in the shade. So look, it's the same principle. If I fast forward it a little bit for you. At home, take your time. Obviously, this is an edited video. The whole painting took me about 2 hours to paint, and I've edited down for about an hour and a half. But if you find areas really easy and you're more advanced, fast forward me. And if you find me that it's more complicated than you thought, you can always pause it, take your time, go at your own speed at home. It's your painting. Obviously, we have coming up to 14,500 subscribers now, and everyone is different. So I appreciate some people like time lapses and they want to go quick, and I have other people who want to go much slower. So I'm trying to cater for everyone. So let me know in the comments if you prefer these step-by-step longer videos or if you prefer quicker ones. So what I'm doing, I'm just adding some lime green and some white, some light green, and some yellow. I'm just making a slightly greener version. And again, same principle. And please use the comments for ideas for tutorials. So if you want to learn anything specific, just put them in the comments below. It's a really good way to get ideas for me. we did a tutorial last week on crashing waves and using cliffs to create perspective, which was a nice easy tutorial, but it really teaches you how to create depths in the landscape painting. And that was a viewer's idea, which was fantastic. So some artist out there who really wants to learn something has come up with a great idea, and we've made a tutorial on it. It's really helped. So win-win. So I'm going to use this color, which is called Luminous Green, which is a incredibly luminous bright green. And I'm just going to add a tiny bit of yellow to it. And what's great about luminous green, it's not really a color you can mix, unfortunately, but it's incredibly bright. So it's really, really handy for if you ever see these landscape paintings on YouTube here and things where they have areas that are in the sunlight and it looks like the leaves are sparkling or really, really bright. Well, that's probably because they're using a really bright luminous paint, which people won't tell you. So I figured this out. I just like buying luminous colors. They're a bit overwhelming, so that's why I've mixed a little bit of yellow into the mix. But again, look, it's the same principle. These areas, just getting some sunlight. And as I say, none of this is hard. It's just time consuming. So just like the video, is do you have the mental patience to put the work in? Because think of that. Do you have what it takes to sit there and keep doing each stage? That's the hard bit. None of it's hard technically. It's just, have you got the concentration level? So let's get some light green. And let's get this lovely bright light green. And let's add a little bit of cobalt blue just to darken her up. So cobalt blue and light green. And kind of just add a little bit of white just to take a bit of the fierceness out of her. And we're going to swap to a fan brush. Now, a fan brush, just like the name, it's got like a fan head to it. And they are fantastic for painting leaves. So you can either use the corner, look, and just dab it. So you can just dab it with the corner of the brush. And what it does is, because it's got spiky bristles, it creates really easy leaves. So we're using a pastel green to sort of push these leaves back. And all it does is it kind of looks like areas of the leaves that are in the shade. We've done the ones in the highlights. So these are branches and leaves that are a bit nearer to the viewer. And we're just trying to create different levels of texture. So some leaves that are near, some that are far. By just using different combinations of green. So we've got pastel greens, we've got luminous greens. Now we've got this sort of, it's kind of like an emerald green, isn't it? And all I'm doing, look, I'm just creating texture. You can use the whole brush if you want to. Look, it sort of goes sideways or diagonally. All we want to do is just create random sort of splats to create texture. So let's have some over here. And then let's get another shade of green. Let's have around here a little bit warmer. So we could either add red or we could add brown. Could still get the same sort of colour. So let's add a little bit of the light green and some raw sienna. You can use orange or red if you haven't got raw sienna. We just want to warm her up to get more of a browny green. And look, I've got lots on my fan brush. And look, now we've got a different shade of green. Just complements each other. Okay, so now you've seen how I do it. Again, I'm just going to speed the footage up and I'll put it back down when we do something different. So you know how to now use a fan brush. So all I'm going to do is use this warmer browny green around the sunlight areas here that we're going to have. So again, we can create bushes. We can create little bushes here and twigs and stuff. Leaves that are sort of hanging by. We just want a variation of colours, variation of different shades of green. So there we go. So this sort of area is going to be in the sun. So if you think that if we're going to use warm colours around the sun, we can use cool colours to create shade. So let's get sap green, which is a nice dark green. And then let's use our fan brush around this area to create a much darker, more silhouetted green. But can you see that dark colours bring things forward? So this bush look now looks like it's much closer to you, doesn't it? And the sort of yellowy sort of pastel colours look further back. So just be aware of that. Be careful. Dark colours, just like the black bank here on the left, it brings things forward. So just be aware when you're doing these paintings not to go too dark. So I'm just creating some nearer foliage. And what that does is it pushes back the sort of yellow and green and brings these sort of bushes and trees closer to the viewer. So we've just got all these different types of green. And don't worry, it looks scruffy. That's part of the charm. We're going to put the trees on top and we're going to make them look more realistic now, and it'll push back those leaves. Now we want to make them quite pastel because we want to push them into the background. So let's get some raw sienna and let's get a little bit of purple to turn it more grey again. So raw sienna and purple. You can use raw sienna and cobalt blue and a bit of purple. My purple's very blue, but you can use a bit of cobalt blue. And we're just going to add a little bit of white to turn it more grey. There we go. So we've got this sort of dark browny grey. And all we're going to do, we're just going to create some faraway trees. So the reason we use this grey is just like the bank. It's the same principle. By using more muted pastel tones, it pushes it off into the distance. So see that? That tree looks further back. And you can either go around your leaves or you can paint on top of them. It's totally up to you. So you can have some leaves coming over the bark of the tree, or you can have the tree in front of them. It's totally up to you. So by having some leaves coming across the colour, when I move my hand, you'll see what I'm talking about. So this tree, look, I've painted across, whereas the one to the left, look, it's got big green leaves sticking over the top of it in the middle. So you can have some of the leaves going around the trees just so it looks like they're in front of some. And you can have some where it looks like the trunk is in front of it. So totally up to you. But if you have a little variation, again, it just adds to the realism. It looks like some branches are in front and some aren't. So look, we've got these nice pastel trees. So again, now you know how to do it. I'm just going to speed up the footage. I'm just using a normal sort of medium size bristle brush. You can use a flat brush if you find it easier to do more straight lines. All you want to do is you want to make your tree trunk wider at the bottom where it hits the ground than at the top. So if you make your top quite chunky like I've done here, just make the bottom a little bit wider just so it looks more realistic. And don't worry if they're scruffy, we can always use some of the yellowy green that we created earlier in the background. If you have any white canvas showing, we can always neaten that up afterwards. So here's a flat brush. I'm just using a flat brush here because it's much easier to get a straight line because the bristles are all elongated. And if you've got a shaky hand or you just find it hard to paint a straight line, a flat brush is really handy. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to get some heat now. I'm going to make a warm colour. So I'm going to get some raw sienna, some orange, and some cad yellow deep hue and some cad yellow to make a peach colour. So look at how vibrant that is. So we're going to add some white just to make it more pastel and less harsh, and a tiny bit of purple. So remember, purple and brown always takes a bit of the colour out. And this should be a lovely sort of peachy colour. So a tiny bit of yellow and a tiny bit of green. Just a tiny bit of green to give it that sort of forest earthy look. There we go. Let's mix that together. But it's predominantly peach. And let's add a tiny bit more raw sienna. Just a tiny bit to make it more brown. We just want a really, really warm, earthy tone. There we go. And I've got my flat brush. And all I'm going to do at the top ends of these trees, I'm going to colour them in with this lovely sort of peachy colour to imply heat. So when later on we paint in all the sun beaming down, all these trees are going to get beckoning in sunlight. They're going to be sort of beaming in the sunlight. So what we're going to do is we're going to use warm colours to imply that. So by just using this peach at the top of the trees, we can make it look like the sun is coming through these leaves. And all I'm going to do, look, I'm just going to smear it with my finger and blend it into the pastel sort of purpley grey. So again, just like the bank, you don't notice the transition. It just looks like it's blending from warm to so from the highlights to the shadows. So hots to colds, yin and yangs. Think of it how you want. So you see that works? So it just looks like some areas are warm and some areas are cool. And then I'm going to clean my brush. So I'm going to dip my brush. So we're going to have the sunlight coming down the path. And then we're going to bring these trees forward. And these ones on the right, we're going to bring a little bit forward. So let's do the ones on the right first. So let's get some black now. So black and brown and really dark colours like we've got here in the corner. They're really overwhelming. Look how dark that is. So let's add a little bit of cobalt blue and a little bit of white to make them more grey and less harsh. So let's get some more cobalt blue. So by adding a little bit of white and cobalt blue, we're just taking a bit of the harshness out of them. So these trees, we'll see how dark this looks. Let's test it out. I think it's still a little bit too dark. So let's add more cobalt blue. And a tiny bit of raw sienna. And then some white. Just to make it more grey. We want it harsh but not too harsh. So a little bit more white. And blue. So remember, cobalt blue is fantastic for pushing things back. So by adding a little bit more raw sienna and raw umber, we can just make it more earthy, more natural. So let's try this out. So again, look, flat-headed brush, so much easier for doing straight lines. If you've got anything elongated, like a tree. So can you see this colour is not as harsh as the bank on the left, but it's a little bit darker than what we have in the middle. So again, it looks like it's in the shade, but it still looks pushed back into the distance. So it's the colours. It's always the colours and the colour mixing that takes a little bit of time, but it's so worth it. That's what creates the realism. So let's have a thin one sort of coming through the trees. Look, so I'm leaving little gaps, so it looks like it's coming through the trees, and some of these trees are going, some of these leaves are going in front of it. So let's have a really thin one there. See, there's little gaps. Let's say, don't worry if you've got some canvas shining through, we can neaten that up. Let's have another little one here in between these big trees to push that back. So it's a bit wonky in the middle, so let's just neaten her up. There we go. So now, just like the leaves, we've got all these variations in colour in our trees. So some look nearer, some look far away. But all it is, if you think it's the same technique, we're just using darker and lighter colours. And that's what's tricking your eyes. And no one taught this to me. I figured this all out myself, which I think is cool. To blow my own trumpet. So let's do the harsh, nice big trees here now on the left to put this all together. So let's get some brown and black to create a really harsh silhouette. Some cobalt blue. And we're going to make some sap green to get that really dark silhouette tone. Just going to mix it slightly into the previous tone because I don't want it all the way black. Black looks really cartoony, so by adding the other colours like cobalt blue and sap green, we could just make it a bit more earthy and a bit more natural. And again, look, we're just going to really block her in. Don't worry too much about any detail. But what this should do, once she's blocked in, it should make it look really close to us. So what I'm doing with the trees, I'm creating sort of these ones that look like they've split. So you have one big bit and then you have a thin sort of branch coming off it. And again, that kind of looks different from just having one straight line. So again, just a little bit of variety. Same with the leaves. Same with the trees. So let's block in this. Let's make this corner really dark because we're going to sign it in that corner. But you see already how it's bringing this closer towards you? So we always want to save our darkest darks for things that are in the foreground. Things that are nearest to you. So it doesn't matter what you're painting. If you want to bring it close, use really harsh dark colours. So let's have a branch here just to frame her. And let's have a bit of a tree coming here. Just frame the composition. Hooray, look how cool this looks. So as I say, you can use this brush. It's got a really sharp edge, so it's really good for straight lines. And you can use it, look, for fine detail if you want. So let's have some shadows. It's kind of like a fine liner, but sideways, because it's got such a sharp edge. It's really, really good for doing really sharp lines, look. So again, we don't want to have too harsh shadows. So I can use the same colour here on the right. But as I go nearer to that bank, all I'm doing is smudging it. So again, it's not as dark and not as harsh. But I'm just going to create some pebbles, and it could be some leaves and things like that that are falling down just here on the path. A lot of this we're going to cover up with sunlight. But let's just put some texture. So we've got this pushed back area, and then we've got this brought forward area with the dark. As I say, look, we can neaten everything up by drying the work. Please dry your work. Especially if you just use black and you're painting in areas, you can use things like fine liners, which I've got here, which you have an elongated nib. These are really, really good if you want to do this. I'm just going to show you. I'm not going to do this on this painting, but I'm just going to show you a few examples. You can use these for creating branches. So because they've got such a thin nib and bristle, they're really, really good for matching the colours and then just creating branches. Now, sometimes you can literally, if you have a reference photo, you can go photorealistic and put every single branch, which would literally take you days because there's thousands. So I'm just showing you a few examples, but I'm not going to do that on this tutorial. But it's the same principle. You can use really, really thin bristle brushes and just match up some of the colours. So we're using this dark grey for this one, and you can do the same with the other colours if you choose to. So again, I'm just going to speed up the footage. You can do lots and lots of branches. You can, as I say, look, clean your brush and use different colours to have different areas. I'm just going over my highlights just with a second coat of paint to make them more vibrant. So as I was saying to you, sometimes with acrylics, they dry really flat. They absorb the colours that are underneath. So by just giving them a second coat of paint, you can just make them look much more vibrant. And same with areas that you've missed. So I've got lots of white canvas showing up. It's so much easier now that I've got these trees as a base to go round. I can get some of my luminous green and I can create some areas to create some leaves and cover up some of that white canvas, and also make some areas look highlighted. So this is what I was talking about earlier. You can have some of your leaves look going through the trees and in front of them, which again just makes them push back more. So by just having some splodges going across the bark, you can just make them look more realistic. It's totally up to you. It's your painting. So do whatever makes you feel comfortable. But all by just spending a few minutes just with fine liners, just smaller brushes, it's so much easier to get in look to these little crevices that I've missed, any bits of white canvas that I've got showing, and just neaten them all up. I'm going to get some white, and I'm going to get some cobalt blue, just a smidge of cobalt blue, and lots of white to make a pastel colour. And we're going to start poking some sky holes. So these are bits of sunlight or bits of background sky that are poking through the leaves. So now we've got all the texture painted in, we can do this really easy trick, which is called sky holes, which is basically poking little gaps in between these leaves, and it just looks like the background sky is shining through. And again, it just creates to the realism. Because we've got all this texturized greens, we've got light greens and dark greens. Now when we add just these little random dots, so it's the same principle as what we did with the leaves, where we're just putting little random splats, we can make it look like gaps in the leaves. So we're going to have more at the top, because obviously there's more sky at the top. But we just want them random. And again, look, it looks really vibrant now. But this light blue, because it's so pastel, it's got so much white in it, it's going to absorb some of that green underneath. So again, if you have to do 2 coats, you have to do 2 coats. But again, it's just a really easy way to do it. Now around the sun is going to be much brighter. So let's get some white and some cad yellow. And let's do the same principle, but with white and cad yellow. So I keep saying to you, none of these techniques are hard. It's just very time consuming. It's just layers. So we're going to do the exact same thing, but now with a bit of heat. So these are all the bits of the sky with the same principle, that again, lots of sunlight. So they're more bleached and they're more a bright yellow. So again, speeding up the footage because you know how to do it now. And all we're going to do is just poke some of these sky holes. So take your time, relax. If you find it helps, if you live near woods, take some photos of just some trees. And then just try to copy sort of the gaps in the holes in the leaves. I'm always out in nature. I love nature. So I'm always with my family, out with my dog in the woods and things. So it's really good if you've got a mobile phone just to take photos. You can use them as references. And as I say, once you know how to do this, you can always use this with your photos. I'm just going back to the blue and just mixing areas together. You can always go back to the photos you take and use this principle to create. So now we've got this background pushback and we've got this darker area in the foreground. We're just going to get some sap green. And I'm just going to do the same principle. I'm just going to bring some of these nearer branches. To frame her. So again, we're going to make the sides and the corners a bit darker. I'm just going to add a little bit of cobalt blue just to make her harsher. So to frame her, to get you to look down the middle. But also just to make it look nearer. So again, just by having some harsher colours here in the foreground. it just frames the painting and it also makes it look nearer. So I want this bank to look really close to the viewer. And again, this one's pretty close, isn't it? So let's just use that. And the good thing is, look, you can use this to texturize your terrain. So I'm leaving gaps in the underpainting and I'm starting to texturize this terrain to make it look like a sort of leafy bank. So let's add more blue to our sap green and a little bit of raw umber brown. And let's make it a little bit harsher in this corner. So this corner is getting a little bit more shade. It's further away from that sun. So by using blues and browns, we can have some of these bushes in the shade. And on the bank. So that looks nice and dark. Let's just have a few sort of going in between these areas. Just here where it sort of joins the path, you've got sort of a harsh, dark area. You could have like fallen leaves and stuff we can put in. So look, you can use it to texturize your path as well. Look. Let's have some fallen leaves. I've got barely any paint on my brush, so it's just kind of like a chalky residue. I'm just scraping with the sort of prickly bristles. And then let's start putting in this bank. So look, I'm deliberately leaving gaps so that harsh black can shine through. And I'm using this bluey green to insinuate that this area is in the shade. And I'm just using the texture of the bristles, look, to create, looks like grass or leaves. So it's just going back and forth between the colours. Let's get some raw sienna and some orange. And let's mix them together, and a little bit of the chromium oxide green, which is kind of like in between light green and sap green. And some blue, and we're going to create sort of like an olive green. So by having lots of orange and raw sienna with green, it creates sort of like a browny green. So in this middle area, we're going to create this sort of olive green. And again, we're doing the same technique. We're leaving little gaps in the underpainting to shine through. And the reason we're using a lighter colour here is because this is where it's going to be more in the sunlight. So it's still, again, like the background, it's still like a warm green, because it's got orange and brown in it to turn it more like a yellow ochre sort of colour. It makes it look like it's in the warm sunlight. So I'm just using that corner of the brush just to imply areas that are in the sun. And the same just here on the corner of this bank. So when we start putting the sun in, and we can use this to create like a warm shadow here on the path. So this is an area that's getting some sunlight, but it's still a bit in the shade. So it's creating this nice warm shadow. So let's have a tree sort of silhouette coming in the middle here. And let's have it come down here. So a lot of, as I say, a lot of these things, these areas we're going to paint over. But it's good to lay the foundations, because sometimes with painting you've got to sort of feel your way out. You've got to try things out. It's not always ABC. It goes A to C, back to D, back to A. So it's just trying to practice areas and sort of match colours. So I'm just going to add a little bit of white to the mix, just to make it more grey and less harsh. Just around here, just going to have sort of a warm shadow kind of like a beige. So as I say, when I'm filming the tutorials, sometimes it's very hard to do everything step by step because a lot of painting is going back and forth. So let's just add a little bit of cad yellow deep hue, which is like a golden yellow. You can add orange to cad yellow if you haven't got that at home. And let's just warm these banks up. So as I say, sometimes it is just feeling your way out and trying things, see if it works. If it doesn't work, don't get disheartened. Paint over it. Not everyone gets everything perfect first time. A lot of it's experience, a lot of it you've just got to work your way through it. So I'm just adding sort of a golden glow, because when you get like a shadow and it's in the sunlight, it tends to have like a glow around it, like a nice soft sort of aura around it. So we're going to kind of do that. So I'm just putting some areas that are nice and warm. So it's all starting to take shape. Look how real this is starting to look already. And it's just colours. So we've got this lovely sky hole. So we've got this nice warm bank. And we've got this cool bank. So we're going to swap to a fine liner. And what we're going to start doing is putting on all the sort of detail over the top to make it look more like photorealistic. We're not going to go too crazy, but I'm going to show you all these techniques that you see in the videos that people use. So let's get some green, chromium oxide green and some blue to sort of create a middle green. And by using a fine liner, look, I can create leaves. So we've got all the base colours down, but now I want to create some detail to make it look more realistic. So by just, again, using a smaller brush, it makes my life so much easier to put fine detail. Again, it's not hard. None of this is hard. It's just time consuming. I'm not very OCD. I'm quite a chilled person. I'm quite lazy. So I'm kind of less is more sort of person, where I think well, that'll do. But if you're very particular, you could do every leaf and you can do every twig and branch, but I'm not like that. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of orange to the mix to create again sort of like a sort of warm sort of musty brown. So again, these are areas, because it's still got some cobalt blue in it, the areas that are in the shade but again some sunlight. So if you imagine when leaves fall, they start off green and then they sort of go like a rusty colour, don't they? You know, like when it's autumn, because they sort of decompose. So by using just the hint of these sort of like warm orangey browns, you can sort of imply that. And again, because it's a little bit darker than we had previously, we can use that for a shadow. So just like we did with the leaves in the background, where we had all different shades of green, like light green, yellowy green, cool bluey green. We're just doing the same with greens and browns really. So I can add, look, I can add more blue to a brown, or more purple, whatever you fancy, and create areas that look like they're in the shade. And I can add more warmth to a brown, like orange or yellow, and make it look like it's in the sun. So it's the same principle. You can add blues and purples to any colour to make them look like they're in the shade. And you can add orange, yellows, pinks and reds to any colour to make them look like they're in some heat. So I'm just creating this nice shadow here on the bank. Now don't forget, if you haven't already, to like and subscribe to the channel. We have over 150 landscape painting tutorials for you guys to binge and learn. If there's anything you want to learn, as I say, please put them in the comments below. Thank you so much for everyone who supports the channel and likes and subscribe already. The channel's doing really well. We're growing. Please share on Facebook if you have Facebook, to promote the channel, so other artists can find you easier. The more artists that find us, the more people can learn, which is always really good. So by liking and sharing the videos, you help other artists find us, which is great. So you're helping the art community. So I'm just going to get some black and some brown and some cobalt blue to make our dark shadow color. And with a fine liner, look, I can create much sharper detail. So if I want sort of harsh shadows in an area, and I want to go in between these core colors that we have mixed now, I can add some fine detail. So I can create a sharp edge going around the bank. I can add harsh shadows in between leaves. And because it is a bit harsh, look, if I smudge it, I can take some of the vibrancy out of it, make it look more flat, more pastel. So that's the great thing about acrylics. You can sort of cheat a lot. They're very forgiving, very good for beginners, and they're very cheap, so they don't cost a lot. So they're great for beginners to learn. So now we've got this little fine liner. Look, we can put little pebbles, we can put some fine detail. So if I zoom in for you, let's just make this tree a little bit darker, just a hint. So again, just fast forwarding a little bit. It's nothing technical. I'm just using black and some brown just to bring this corner a little bit closer. Again, just to darken the corners. And then when we have the light source in the middle, it's going to really insinuate the middle. Now I'm going to teach you a little bit of a trick now. Because the left hand side and the right hand side are quite harsh, we want to make shadows in the middle that aren't as harsh. So we're going to make a grey. So we're going to add some cobalt blue to some black and brown and some white. We're just going to make a sort of grey colour. And we're going to test it out here on the bank. Because we've put some highlights in, there's not much texture here on the bank like there is on that right hand side. So let's add a little bit more raw sienna and a little bit of purple. I still think it's a bit boring, so let's add a tiny bit more black. Just make it a little bit grey. What we're trying to do, we're trying to create a shadow colour that is not really dark, but not really harsh either. We want to kind of have it in between. So by adding some browns and some purples and lots of white, so this has a bit of raw sienna and raw umber to create sort of a browny grey, a little bit of cobalt blue just to make it more grey still. What we're trying to do, we're trying to create, look, here we go, perfect. These are the shadows, just like our trees, that are more pastel. So they're still dark because they're going to get bleached by the sun. They're not as harsh. And what it does is it just, think of what I've been saying throughout all the tutorials. It's like a bridge color. It kind of bridges between the really brights and the really dark blacks. So by having this color, look, that's in between, it still looks like texture here off in the background, but it doesn't look as harsh. So it still keeps it far off into the background. And we can, as I say, what I was saying earlier about readjusting areas and going back to areas, you can look, use that color on this tree just to sort of bridge the areas together, so there's not so much a jump between the really brights and the really darks. So the good thing is once you start gauging areas in a painting, this is what I was saying about ABC earlier. Sometimes you have to sort of gauge areas and just use your intuition. That's a lot of, like, being an artist is using your internal intuition to figure things out. So it's all good asking me how to do things, but you've got to figure out for yourself. So there we go. And that sort of bridges that area, and we can have a little bit of shadow here on the base of these trees with that colour, just so it all matches. and it just makes all the transitions look more realistic. Because if you think in nature, you just don't notice the change in colour. It is so perfect, and your eyes are like the best cameras ever invented. So people don't see what's right in front of them, what they are and what they have. Like, this place is beautiful, and their bodies are incredible. And because we take it for granted, because we have it all, it's not till you lose it or you have something that you can't have anymore, you don't appreciate it. So there we go. So it's all bridged together. Just using a little bit darker in between colour, just a tiny bit darker, so it's not quite black, but it's not quite that sort of dark purple. And I'm just linking these two areas together. So same principle. If there's areas that sort of have a big jump, we want to just either darken them up or lighten them up, so the transition all matches. And then I'm just going to get some jet black, some ivory black, and my fine liner. I'm going to put some grooves in my tree. So I'm just going to, when I move my big chunky hand, I'm just leaving gaps in the underpainting, and I'm using pure black, no other colour, and I'm just creating grooves in my bark. You see that? So again, by just leaving gaps in the painting, I can create all these wiggly lines that look like bark. And the same here, I want my harshest shadows in the bottom corner. So if I want areas to look really, really dark and in the shade, we can do that with the leaves in a minute. So let's just put all these grooves on the bark. And then down here, look, same principle. If I want really, really harsh shadows. And remember, we're going to sign it in the bottom left hand corner. So we want a really, really dark corner for our signature to stand out. And remember, when you're signing your work, always put your signature about a centimetre or so up from the corner and away from the corner. Simply for the fact that if you ever frame any of your artwork, you've got to account that the frame or the border is going to take a little bit of your painting, just an outline going around it. So always just put your signature a little bit higher than you, right in the bottom corner. And if you ever make prints, or if you ever frame your artwork for a gift or anything like that, or to hang in your house, you won't cover up your signature. So a little top tip there. I'll show you at the end. So we're just going to get some black, and we're just going to make this tree in the corner really nice and dark. And that's us finished all the shadows. And then we've got this lovely darkest darks here in that corner. And then what we're going to do, we're going to get a clean brush, and we're going to get some pure titanium white straight out of the tube. And we're going to put our brightest highlights. So we're going to use a clean brush, and we're going to use just pure titanium white, nothing else. So it's incredibly bleached and vibrant. So this is the harshest sunlight that is coming through the trees and creating incredibly bright, harsh shadows, highlights on the forest path. So if you imagine a forest, we've got all this lovely trees and branches, and this sunlight is shining through. So really, really bright white. And then we're going to get some of this buttery yellow that we used for around our sky holes. This Naples yellow, which is cad yellow and white. And we're going to create a glow around our white. So if you imagine white, as it cools, gets slightly more yellow. And then we create a lovely glow around it using this buttery white. And what it does is it just makes it look more soft and more realistic to create that beautiful glow. So now, as I say, think of yin and yang. We've got these lovely, lovely darks. We want to really complement with really lovely highlights. So all I'm doing, whatever shape I've created, I'm just going around it with this yellow, this slightly darker colour, to get a wonderful glow. And as I say, it's just by using a clean brush or a new brush, you just don't get any of the previous colour sort of murky in it. The problem with things like blacks and blues and browns, if you just get even a slight tad on your white, it just makes it look a bit musty and a bit not as vibrant. So by just using a different brush or just cleaning it, it just makes a difference. I know all too well because I'm lazy. Sometimes I forget to clean my brush, and then I go to put a highlight on and my bright yellow goes a musty, horrible mustard yellow. So by just using straight out the tube paint, you can make these highlights really bright. Okay, so let's get some more of that bright yellow. And let's create a sunbeam. Now before attempting this, please dry your painting. Now I'm a pro, so I can do it first time because I do this all the time. But if you're nervous, if you dry your painting with a hairdryer before attempting this, if you make a mistake, your painting will be lovely and all that hard work we've done for an hour will still be there in the background, and you can use a baby wipe or a wet kitchen cloth to just wipe away this sunbeam. So all I'm doing, I've got hardly any of this paint on my brush, and I'm using the canvas, which is obviously texturized, and I'm using a dry brush with no water, and I've just got some of this lovely sort of colour on my brush, and I'm just using the texture. So as I scrape against it, it creates a sunbeam. So let's do a darker one, and I'll show you very slowly how to do it. So I'm going to get some cad yellow, deep hue, and a tiny bit of orange, and lots and lots of white to make a slightly darker version. And all I'm going to do, I'm just going to outline my highlights again in a slightly brighter yellow, sort of darker yellow. So think of what I was saying. As it cools, it gets white to yellow to orange. So if you have a colour wheel at home or just a picture of a rainbow, you can use that to sort of think which colour goes into which. And just here on the banks, we can have areas that are getting really bleached by the sunlight, that are touching these sort of sunbeams. So let's have another sunbeam. I'm just working out where to have it. So let's get our paint and let's wipe it on a surface. So you can use kitchen towel. I'm using my t-shirt because I am so scruffy. And all we're going to do, we've got barely any paint on our brush, and we're just going to use the texture of the canvas, and we're just going to gently rub our paintbrush against it, and we're trying to go as straight as we can to create a diagonal line. And look, it creates this chalky residue that looks like a sunbeam. Look how beautiful that is. What an easy technique. So this is a fantastic technique to use. You can use this on the sunset, any sunsets or anything with light. And all it is, look, I've got hardly any paint on my brush. So it's like having chalk. So think of a pastel. And look, I could just push hard and I can rub against the canvas. And because the texture of the canvas is quite bumpy, it just takes the paint off. So as I say, if you're nervous about doing this or you make a mistake, just have some baby wipes at hand. And you can just wipe it away and all your beautiful painting is underneath. So again, I'm just using that colour just to soften up areas. Let's have a little one peeking through here. Look at that. So easy. And it looks so real. And all it is a brush technique. So just for that technique, that deserves a like on this video. A big thumbs up just for that. And then look, I can use my white to really emphasize where these sunbeams are touching. So if you think like, now you know, just like I said to you, once you know where things are going to be in the painting, let's get some white and let's just put this area a little bit brighter. When you know where things are going to be, you can see where the sun is touching, and then you can highlight areas. So I'm just going to get some black. So as I say, now we've got the sunlight, let's complement it with some really harsh black to create some shadows. So again, with my fine liner, it's so much easier to do fine detail. So I can use that to make that bank look much nicer. And look, so look, if I make a mistake, look, I smeared some white. I can always wipe it away. I can always use a baby wipe. Or I can even just get the other colour, look, and just colour over it. So there's nothing you can't fix. If you do make a mistake, or you want to brighten things up, look, you can give it a second layer of paint. That's what I'm doing, just to brighten it up. And the same goes to if you make a mistake and just wipe it away. So don't ever fret, don't get yourself stressed. Just relax, take your time. And practice makes perfect. So if you don't nail it first time, there's nothing wrong with that. You can always try again. I've done thousands of sunbeams, so that's why I can do it first time. Just put a slightly bit of the first colour in these ones, just to make them look a little bit lighter. So what I'm doing is just add a little bit of white and yellow to the golden ones. And then I'm going to get some white, and I'm going to get a big brush, and I'm going to create the sun. So I'm doing the same technique, wiping away. I've got a dry brush, and I'm wiping away 90% of the paint. So I've just got this chalky white paint. And because I've just wiped it on something, I've got hardly any on the bristles. So it's really, really soft. And then I can use a blender brush just to create this sort of white glow. Just to soften areas so it looks like the light is glowing. So if I zoom in for you, why not, let's get even more advanced. Let's put some highlights on this tree bark. So let's get some yellow. So think of what we just learned. You've learned that the light is white, and then we've got the yellow, and then we're going to go into orange. So yellow goes into orange. And then we're going to go into raw sienna because it's getting even darker. So we've gone from yellow to orange to a tiny bit of raw sienna brown. So you can create that with orange and brown. So you're just getting darker as you move further from the light. And we can go round our bark. And it just looks, when we zoom out, look at that. It looks like the light is coming through that tree. Look how realistic that looked. And it took 5 seconds. So as I say, look, now you know where all these wonderful light beams are coming down. We can get brighter colours, and we can add really sharp highlights for it to look like areas that are glowing in the sun. So I'm just using some of that light green, and I'm just highlighting areas. So this corner of the bank's getting a little bit of sunlight. So if I go over my really dark blacks, I can just paint them back in a minute. So look, if I get some of that luminous green, I can add little tiny sort of sparkles of sunlight on these leaves. And as I say, it really helps to have this tiny brush. So I've got links in the painting description underneath with links to brushes and things. You don't have to buy them from me. I'm not saying you have to. But what I'm saying to you is, if you buy a multi-pack of brushes, they normally contain all the brushes that are in the tutorials, and they're very cheap. They're like $5–10, and you can have a flat brush, a fan brush, a fine liner, one to do the branches, one to do the blending, and it just makes your life so much easier. It's a bit like if you were building something and you have the right screwdrivers and hammers. It's so much easier than try to do it with your hands. So having the right tools just makes a really, really big difference. So we've got some of these highlights just here in the foreground. I'm just using the darker green as I move into the corner. So these could be all bits of leaves that are getting some sunlight, bits of grass. Could have a bush here in the corner. And then let's get some orange. Oh god, my brush is dirty. See what I mean about not cleaning my brushes? So lazy. So let's get some orange and a little bit of white, and we're just going to have like a pumpkin colour. And again, we're just going to have some of these dried up leaves that are sort of sparkling in the sun. So as I say, look, because we're putting some highlights on, we've kind of neglected our blacks. They've what's it called? They look a bit ropey now. They don't look as, it doesn't look as precise. I'll just add a little bit of Cad Yellow Deep Hue, so golden yellow here. So once we add the highlights, we can use our black again to put back in the shadows. So let's do the highlights first. So let's get some of this deep hue, and we'll just put some little highlights here on the back. There's some leaves here that's sparkling. And here. So look, where I've got the sunbeams, I can start putting in areas that are getting some sunlight, because I know where they're going to be. So here can be some leaves that are getting the sunlight. This one's at the end of a sunbeam. And then let's have some here, just a bit of gold here. Warm her up. So let's get, just trying to think, let's get some of the orange and just add it to our gold, and let's add a little bit of green just to turn it a little bit more musty, kind of like a yellow ochre. And let's just around that area just have ones that are slightly getting sun but not as bright, just to tie it together. See what I mean? We're just layering over the areas again and again and again. And I say, a lot of this comes with practice. But it's just understanding that you have really warm colours, in between colours, and then cooler colours. So let's look, let's use that luminous green. These are the ones that are getting absolutely bleached by the sun. So we can put them in between the warmer colours, and then they look like they're sparkling in that sunlight. So let's have a few on the floor that are falling down. And because they're at the bottom of the sunlight, it looks realistic. It looks natural. And as I say, look, we can get our black and put it back in. So where we've got these colours now mixed, when we get our fine liner and just create really sharp, almost like comic-like detail, because all the colours are nicely mixed, now when we put the detail back, it looks so much more real. So I'm going to get loads of white, and I'm just going to add a tiny dot of cobalt blue, but more white than anything. And I'm just going to go over the sky holes around the sunlight. I want to make them look incredibly vibrant, and I think we had too much blue in the previous mix. So by just using white and having just a dot of cobalt blue, literally a pinprick, so it's just a slightly off white, we can make just around the tree, we can make some of these sky holes really, really incredibly vibrant to look like the sunlight peeking through. So again, take your time, just try to make them random, all different shapes and sizes. Try to think where the light would be coming through. And then because it's so bright, what it's going to do is, now we've got these different textures of leaves in the background, it should look really, really natural. So that's looking really realistic. So let's just go down here. So now you know how to do it. Again, I'm just going to speed up the footage and I'm just going to start filling it in. So same color, just lots and lots of white with a tiny dot of blue. If you have to go over it twice, you have to go over it twice just to make it really vibrant. And again, it really helps to use a fine liner. I can get really sharp little indentations between where the light is coming through these branches. I've got some coming through the sunbeams, some around it. And then what it should do, as we move to the right hand side, it should just naturally blend into the darker blue. So we've got that corner looking a little bit more dark for the sky holes on that side, so it looks really natural. And then when we zoom out, it should look really realistic. So we just add in these little holes. So easy to do. Such an easy technique. Woohoo! And then let's get some white and our nice clean drying brush, and let's just start blending. Look, I'm just softly, same technique. I've got barely any paint on my brush, and I'm just using the really soft bristles to let that chalky residue come off and make it really look soft and make it look like that sun is beaming around the tree. So just blending it, just creating little circles with our brush. So it really helps if you have a really soft bristle brush. So things like a blender brush, as I say, they cost £1, £2, a couple of dollars. They're really cheap. They're like a makeup brush, so they're really soft to touch. And again, look, by just creating little circles, you can just soften up areas. Not got barely any paint. Look, I'm just creating little soft circles. I can even make the ends, just sort of the beginnings, sorry, of just these sunbeams look more vibrant, just softer, more natural. And I always recommend that you just take a step back from your work and just look at it and see which areas. Look, I'm just going over these areas to push them back. From just taking a step back, you see which areas are a bit too harsh or which need a bit of blending. So just around here, I'm just going to add a little bit more brown, some raw sienna brown and a little bit of cobalt blue. So raw sienna brown and cobalt blue, tiny bit of raw umber. And just on the top of the trees, just like we did with the raw sienna, I'm just going to make them a little bit more brown because they're going to get bleached by the sun. So I don't want them as black. I don't want them as harsh and silhouetted. So just by adding a little bit of colour just on these three here, four, you can just, just make them look like they're just sort of glowing in the sun. And as I say, look, if your highlights dry flat, just by going over them a second time, look, I'm just rubbing it with my finger just to make it nice and soft. So just yellow into orange and then into raw sienna, and then you can add, as I say, a little bit of cobalt blue and brown just to make it a bit cooler. So I'm just getting a bit of orange to complement my yellow. So look, if you look here from the right to the left, you've gone from yellow to orange to a more warmy brown to a cooler brown to a black. So it's just going from hot to cold. And let's get some of that white with the tiny dot of blue. I've got barely any paint on my brush, like literally barely any. And I'm just pushing these trees back by colouring in over the top of them. You see that? You can still see them, but now they look much softer because I'm just going over the top with this chalky residue and I'm just pushing it back, and that will bring my lovely silhouetted trees more forward. So I'm pushing that area back and making it really nice and soft. And then just here at the bottom on the path, we're just going to neaten her up for the next 2 minutes. So again, look, where my highlights, that white has absorbed the colours underneath and it's not as bright. I could just go over it with thicker paint, give it a second coat of paint. And the same with my glow, with my yellow. And then all I'm going to do to complement it, I'm going to get some, the same colour we just used on the tree. I'm going to get raw sienna, cobalt blue, and some raw umber. And all we're doing, we're just creating the harsh shadows. So imagine the tree's got a nice shadow or a silhouette on that forest path in between the sunbeams. So by just using a cooler tone, we can just create that lovely shadow. And if you want to create areas that are a bit more warm, as I say, you can just add a little bit of orange or a little bit of raw sienna, just to warm areas. And then lastly, all we're going to do is just with our glow, if it's dried a bit flat, as I say, you can just go over it. So things like your whites, just go right over it. Your buttery yellow, which was just white and cad yellow, just make it more vibrant by going over it. And then if it dries a bit scruffy, or you like me, look, you've just made it a bit scruffy, you can just get some cad yellow or some cad yellow deep hue and create more of a yellow glow around it. So it's just really just anything you paint over, we're just reworking, just trying to insinuate that glow, just make it look really vibrant. And if you want, look, you can create a shimmer going down the path with some white, just again, just having a focus point for the viewer to look at. And I think she's finished. So I've signed her on the left and I've taken into account just a little gap either side, so if I frame her. So if you've learnt how to create texture in your leaves, how to use pastel colours to push things back into the far distance, how to blend on top of that, again to soften it, but to do the opposite and to make things dark in the foreground to bring things forward like the trees here on the left, how to put highlights and detail using fine liners, how to use fan brushes to create leaves, and how to use blender brushes to paint sunbeams and beautiful glows on your forest landscape painting. So my name is Murray. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. We have over 150 tutorials here on my channel, so please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. If there's any suggestions for tutorials, please put them in the comments below, and don't forget to tag me at mstewart.paintings with your versions of the tutorials. Happy paintings, enjoy guys, take care, bye.